Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Welcome, welcome. We're so pleased to have you here today. Thanks so much for joining us in discussing Diary of a Young Naturalist by Dara McAnulty. Let me tell you a little bit about who we have joining us today. First, of course, if you're new here and you don't know, we are Lost City Books, owned by Adam. We are a used, new, and rare bookstore located in Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C., and we're run by a close-knit team of some of DC's coolest kids, including myself, artists, educators, musicians, writers, and of course, avid readers, all coming together to create a unique environment and curate an eclectic selection of books. I am your host for tonight, or this afternoon rather, Shady Rose, and I'm so pleased to be here today. Dara McAnulty is the author of Diary of a Young Naturalist, which has received numerous awards and accolades, including the British Book Award and the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing. Dara's love for nature, his activism, and his honesty about autism have earned him a huge social media following from across the world. In 2017, he was awarded the BBC Springwatch Unsprung Hero Award and named Birdwatch magazine's local hero. In 2018, he was awarded Animal Hero of the Year by the Daily Mirror and became ambassador for the RSPCA and the I Will campaign. In 2019, he became a young ambassador for the Jane Goodall Institute and became the youngest ever recipient of the RSPB Medal for Conservation. Dara lives with family in Northern Ireland. Bathsheba Demuth is a writer and historian with particular interests in the Russian and North American Arctic. Her engagement with northern environments and cultures began when she was 18 and moved to the village of Old Crow in the Yukon. For over 2 years, she mushed huskies, hunted caribou, fished for salmon, and otherwise learned to survive in the taiga and tundra. Her multiple prize-winning first book, Floating Coast, An Environmental History of the Bering Strait, was named a Nature Top 10 Book of 2019 and Best Book of 2019 by NPR, Curtis Reviews, and Library Journal, among others. Her writing has appeared in publications from the American Historical Review to the New Yorker. While not in the Arctic, she lives in Rhode Island, where she's an assistant professor of history and environment and society at Brown University. And a little bit about Diary of a Young Naturalist. Diary of a Young Naturalist chronicles the turning of 15-year-old Dara McAnulty's world. From spring and through a year in his home patch in Northern Ireland, Dara spent the seasons writing. These vivid, evocative, and moving diary entries about his connection to wildlife and the way he sees the world are raw in their telling. I was diagnosed with Asperger's/autism age 5. By age 7, I knew I was very different. I had got used to the isolation. My inability to break through to the world of talking about football or Minecraft was not tolerated. Then came the bullying. Nature became so much more than an escape. It became a life support system. Diary of a Young Naturalist portrays Dara's intense connection to the natural world and his perspective as a teenager, juggling exams and friendships alongside a life of campaigning. In writing this book, Dara explains, I've experienced challenges, but also felt incredible joy, wonder, curiosity, and excitement. In sharing this journey, my hope is that all people of all generations will not only understand autism a little more, but also appreciates a child's eye view on our delicate and changing biosphere. That is an incredible quote. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests for today. Welcome. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you both so much for joining. I'm sure that our audience is really eager to hear a lot more about Diary of a Young Naturalist. We've had customers coming in and asking about it. So I'd like, Dara, if you could open us up with a few insights and comments on your perspective on writing this book, how it impacted you, and maybe how you hope it might impact others who read it.
Okay, so Diary of a Young Naturalist is it is a diary first and foremost. It is chronicles what went on in my life throughout a year and all of the challenges and changes that go along with that. Because I moved house, I went from west to east, to completely different landscape. Well, in my eyes, it's not really that different. Changing schools, dealing with bullying, and all of those changes and how I dealt with them and how nature helped me through it is the basic premise of the book. But I think it takes in a lot more than those base concepts. It also talks about mental health, the plight of the natural world, and the wonder and beauty of the natural world, and trying to blend them all into a concise package because it's what's sort of going on in my brain, essentially. I didn't write it as a book because you never write a diary as a book. That's a bit ridiculous. You write it to this omnipotent person or deity that is the diary, and it means that you can push everything into that. all of the flaws, all of the strengths, all the weaknesses, everything that makes you human into a piece of writing. And you get everything in that way. You get the good and the bad, the highs and the pretty bad lows. And I think that helps. It gave me a sense of writing the book to be able to write it, because if it wasn't in the diary format, I probably couldn't have written half of what I ended up putting into the book, because I needed to feel like, if it's a diary, you've got to be honest, and honesty means that I have to put everything in. Otherwise, I'm not a human. I'd be inhuman if I was perfect, or if I only included the good things. So that's why I did that. And I think the book for me means it's like all of that emotion at that time, which is a lot of emotion, all condensing down into a book, was really, really important for me, because that was a lot going on in my head at that time that was crashing about in there, going through all sorts of destructive thoughts, and just getting them out on the page actually really helped ending up dealing with them, which was like the big thing in the book of whether or not writing was actually worth it. And the conclusion is yes, it is important, because it allows us to make our messages and our voices heard in any way that we can. And it also helps us cope with this very fast-paced and busy world.
Those insights are incredible. I really love what you said about how in writing a diary, you ended up creating a really honest portrayal of what you were experiencing and what you were doing with your life, because you weren't intending for this to become a book, a published book. So in a way, it feels to me as though, you know, there were unexpected moments of revelation for you as an author to become an author based on private journals.
Yeah, like the book wasn't even going to be published originally. It was only at the end of spring when I was like, when I really enjoy doing this. I probably, if I hadn't have decided that before summer hit, which was like a truck in the book, raging truck of summer, then the book probably would have never been published. But if the thing that actually made me want to write the book was the first entry of summer, the Goshawk entry. That was the one where I was like, I want to do this. I want to write this as a full book. I remember that was the first entry that I ever planned out, like actually tried to write it like with some sort of structure, because before that it was all like bloggy sort of stuff. It was the one that needed a little bit more polish. After that, it sort of wrote itself in a way. And it was about the end of spring where it transcended from being a collection of blogs or a collection of journal entries that may have been published, we'll see what happens sort of thing, to a fully fledged piece of nonfiction book, which was slightly scary when it happened, because it happened very suddenly. It was just like 1 second it was my little diary, next thing it was a book, which is a completely different thing altogether. But you had to treat it as the same thing, because you couldn't know that I knew that it was going to become a book, because then it would come off really weird. You couldn't go, it's the end of spring, and then it becomes it would just sound really weird. So it was like trying to write it without the knowledge that it was going to be published, if that makes sense. You gotta, because it was the one thing that you couldn't really be. It was I think that's the only thing in the book that is slightly verges on the edge of dishonesty, is the fact that I'm lying to myself that the book will never be published.
That it keeps on as your diary even after.
Yeah, so it keeps the diary format, because then it's just a literary. It's not a diary anymore if I know it's going to be published, because you don't treat the diary like because you write a diary to like Dear Diary, or it's like this deity that we all seem to write to. Like it must get some really interesting stories, that deity.
Yes.
But so I had to treat it as the same thing, the same audience, because writing for the person who never who's never going to talk to you, or that doesn't really exist in the real world, and then writing for an actual audience are two very different things, and then trying to keep it in your mind as sort of the same. That was a little bit difficult, but I kind of just managed to block that out and sort of just keep on writing.
I was so struck. I was just rereading parts of it this morning, and there are some scenes in this that are just kind of indelible to me. One is that there's a scene where you offer someone a feather when you're much younger, and then this person's mother comes in and says, no, that's dirty, don't touch it. And it's this sort of beautiful piece of the natural world that you're offering up. And then your kind of descriptions of how difficult school life is and just how cruel, which it sort of brought me back to some childhood places that I haven't spent time in recently, because they're so vivid, and I think are a reminder to adults to not actually forget how cruel school can be, and children can be. But I wondered, reading this morning, if you see a relationship between that kind of offhanded dismissal of the feather and our kind of offhanded dismissal of children and their experiences, or children to each other.
I think there probably is a connection somewhere in the mind of this slight negativity that we seem to have at the moment. But like, there's probably some overarching connection between us being a little bit more aggressive to difference or change or something strange and new. There's a slight aversion to that in our society, because we see to anything that we don't really understand, we repel, which is probably a connecting factor for those things, because people who don't understand nature, and the first thing that they might think is that, oh my God, there's lots of dangerous things. They might, I feel like people make this connection of, oh my goodness me, there's loads of dangerous stuff out in nature that possibly could harm my child. Then, because they don't have the knowledge to know that most likely, no, it won't kill your child. And they freak and they go, oh my goodness me, it's disgusting, get away from it. There's like a bit of parental protection going on there, mixed with a lack of knowledge. What ends up happening then, of course, is that the child shuts down, because if a parent tells them no, when a parent tells us no, something's dangerous, we generally go, okay, that's probably something dangerous, because that's how we learn. That's how we children learn what's good and what's bad, is their parents tells them what's good and what's bad. So if their parents tell them if that nature's dirty or disgusting, then they'll generally think that that's sort of agreed upon. And then you've got the bullies as well, and they don't understand autism. They don't understand what's going through my head whenever I go into a mental breakdown. They just go, either he's having a tantrum, or there's like he's shutting down or something. He's broken, which is completely wrong. But it comes from a lack of understanding, and what we have a lack of understanding of generally terrifies us. The people who it doesn't terrify usually become scientists, because they love stuff that they don't understand. But for non-scientists, the stuff that we don't understand generally scares people. Is like, because what we don't know how then it could possibly hurt us. Is base human reactions. So the way of combating those base human reactions generally is to actually provide that knowledge to be readily available. because then you can go, okay, then I'm not going to die if I go into nature, or if I pick up feathers, because I've been picking up feathers for a decade now, and I have not died from it yet. So and many people have picked up feathers, and they're not dead yet. I feel like we'd hear about it. And so we can generally guess that it's probably fine. And then if we get that education out there, then people's opinions will change. And that's sort of how it works. Whether or not they choose to accept that information is a whole other thing, but that's getting a little bit more complex than I could possibly I'm informed enough to make a like a point on. It gets a little bit like, okay, when you look into the science behind of like accepting the information that you're giving to people. But basically, more education means less bullying, and it means more receptiveness to nature. It means less children being told that something is bad, which will generally mean that they engage with it more. It doesn't mean that they will engage with it, but it does sort of say that they've got a greater chance of engaging with it, which is quite interesting.
To sort of continue on that point, something that seems to be happening in our culture over the last several decades is that disconnection from nature, and that rejection of real information and experiential information with not only nature, but with the different facets of humanity that that contribute to the whole of our species and our culture.
Yeah.
And I wonder if either of you have opinions about this, on what that looks like now in our society, and how we might crawl back from that, and what are some cultural changes that could shift the way that we culturally across the globe, especially in the Western world, for example, have kind of fallen into this rejection of information and fallen into this disconnection from nature.
When it comes to like taking in information, I think the first thing that needs to be taught is, I find that people get taught critical analysis. Like, it's a good thing to teach people, is to be able to be skeptical of information and to be able to process it, and that's proper science. But people seem to forget the analysis part, and just be critical without having any evidence to back it up. They're taught to be skeptical, but they're not really told how to be skeptical. That sort of makes sense. Like, we've had an epidemic of conspiracy theories, because there's a lot of information out there now, and not all of that information is factually correct or has corrective evidence to back it up. And all of this seems to contribute to this entire, when you see all of this misinformation around you, you don't really know where to turn. It creates this disconnect between what's actually true and what's not true. So, and that means people are more likely to reject information a lot. I do find that if you can't be with absolute certainty that something is true, like it becomes a whole complicated issue, which is probably why we've seen a lot of that rejection of science recently, is because scientists are usually introverted and don't like speaking on the internet much. So they don't. So it's like, if you can speak an opinion loud enough, it becomes true, sort of thing. Scientists generally just, like, honestly, you think for some of the smartest people on this earth, they could use like technology properly or something. But it is what it is. So I think getting better education in schools, like teaching people actual critical analysis, not just being skeptical of their own free will, because that can, if you're not taught the proper processes for going down a skeptical line of thought, you'll inevitably make mistakes, and those mistakes can be mentally devastating, as we've seen. So better education, first of all, and also making sure that science is a lot more almost this we almost need to bring back the sanctity of science almost, because it's like because science has been like made less credible almost, which is ridiculous when you think about it. It's like our primary way of figuring out stuff has been made less credible because of the rejection of information that is given by experts. But I think we've exhausted this. It's sort of you can really go down a rabbit hole with this, because you come down to the bottom of the line and sometimes you just go, why? Why do they reject it? And there's probably some complex psychological reason, and there's environmental factors in as well. So it's all really, really complex, but it probably does contribute to a disconnect of nature because of that primary function. What you don't know, you don't what you don't know, you can't protect, and what you don't know, you can't love. What you don't know, you generally feel afraid of. And I think so. That's why I'm a big advocate for trying to almost completely change the education systems, because obviously they're not working. It feels quite apparent to me that if someone believes that, I don't know, the moon landing never happened, or that all of these crazy stuff, how can we tell them to believe that climate change is real? That's an important one for us. Or that biodiversity loss, because they might say, oh, I don't see any difference. But the differences are happening on such a small level that it's almost like you need the equipment to see it at that point, and they just go. But anyway, I'm going completely down the rabbit hole here.
Well, I think, I mean, in some ways, your book, Dara, is an example of kind of how to bridge some of that separation, because there are so many moments in it of paying such close attention to the natural world around you, whether it's in your back garden or in the walk to school or in, you know, the kinds of places that I think particularly Americans tend to associate with being natural, just like a national park or some sort of scenic place. And I think that that's one of the things I found really striking in your work, is that you don't have some sort of hierarchy of what is more natural or more worth observing and paying attention to and knowing about and finding beautiful. It can be, you know, the ivy that you watch from your hammock, or it can be, you know, some much broader kind of landscape. And that, at least in this country, I think people often have a sense that you need to like go to Yellowstone to have an experience with nature. And
honestly, I wish we had a Yellowstone.
Nothing against Yellowstone, definitely.
No, yeah, but I think it's because I grew up in a city, first of all, so I had to sort of make do. It's like really congested. It's like one of the most congested cities in Europe for being entirely incredibly small, Belfast. But I still do love that city. Oh, it's a special. It's a strange and special place. But because you find these pockets of nature that you might not expect to find, these little creatures that you've sort of got to appreciate in the moment, or else they sort of do disappear. So I took what I could get. I loved pigeons. And I discovered that there's so much variation in pigeons. That was like, because like I would like try and see all of the different types, colorations of pigeons. That was like what I spent a lot of my childhood doing, playing around in parks, trying to explore every last inch of them, looking at squirrels, like trying to squeeze every last bit of nature out of the city. And I discovered that the best way of looking at nature is if you don't have a lot of species, or because Northern Ireland isn't the most biodiverse place in the world. Like it's pales in comparison to like America, or even like the rest of Europe. It's because it's like an island that's kind of off an island in the Atlantic. And there was an ice bridge there once, but the ice bridge melted, so we've got like no snakes or anything. Or I think we've got one toad and one newt and one lizard. So it's like, we're not the most biodiverse place in the world. So you've got to sort of, so I learned how to take a detail like a dandelion, which is the yellow flower, or daisies or whatever little flower that I could get a hold of, and seeing all of the little details of it, the complexity of it. Because that was what really intrigued me, was all the little details and how they all interacted, how everything worked. And that's how I got all my enjoyment out of nature. And I think it's like Yellowstone is a massive dramatic place, which is incredibly beautiful. And it's still, yet still, it's a system with lots of different complex components within it. Like I remember they reintroduced the wolves to it, and it completely changed the entire geography of Yellowstone. Like rivers started changing because forests started growing because of different deer populations, which changed like the flow of rivers even. And the entire environment changed because one little piece was moved. And it shows you how all these little details still interact, even on the grandest of scales, like in Yellowstone. And it's the same with the tiniest of stuff, like a garden, or even like a bunch of flowers that you've got like a wall hanging basket. Yeah, even that has its own little system within it, that if you change one little detail, the entire thing changes. And that's what really intrigued me, how all of these different systems work so closely together and so detailed together.
Thank you for that. I'll take an opportunity now to remind our viewers that if you have a question for our guests today, you can leave a comment below the video that you're watching right now, and we'll get around to them in a Q&A towards the end of our live stream. But before then, Dara, I know that you have a short excerpt that you'd like to read for us, and so that we can get a sense of what this diary of yours is all about.
Okay. Okay. Last Sunday, for the festival of St. Patrick, we made a pilgrimage to Glendalough, a glacial valley with 2 lakes and an ancient monastic settlement founded by St. Kevin, my blackbird saint. It was the first time I'd been, and all I wanted was to feel solitude and peace, but it was impossible. Standing out on the bridge, looking over the restless Glandassan River, foaming over boulders towards the round 30-foot tower. I could see people rushing here and there, tourists everywhere, but I was one too, a pilgrim of St. Kevin. And although it didn't feel like they were there for solace, as they swarmed with phones and clicking cameras and booming voices rushing from one church to another. Maybe all the people were longing for the same thing as me. I was entranced by the place, with its granite structures covered in lichen and ferns, the walls with forests of polytrichum mosses and liverworts. We took our time, found pools of tadpoles, stopped to listen to full-throated mistlethrush singing in an overstory of oak and an understory of holly, hazel, and rowan, with bluebells anemone and sorrel resplendent and glittering. The sun was shining, everything was golden and green, laden with morning rain, and I travelled inwards to fade out the voices and unnatural rumblings, tuned into the wildlife around me. Blanard was in heaven too, as she caressed the bark of the best climbing trees. And while resting her cheek against one mossy bough, she insisted she could hear a heartbeat. I could see it in her eyes. She really did feel it. After circling the lower lake, we walked the longest of the Polonas waterfall routes. And by the time we reached Reefert Church, we were by ourselves. Silence as we climbed the steps of the rocky spur towards St. Kevin's cell. Only the foundations remain now, a circular set of jutting stones. There was still a granite slab etched with the outline of downcast eyes, the noble nose, a slight smile. I wasn't really prepared for the intensity of emotion when I noticed a carved hand and a bird, a blackbird. I traced my fingers over shapes in shimmering quartz, and right there, under an overhang, there was a ladybird at rest, an orange ladybird, seeking shelter upon the head of St. Kevin. My family carried on up towards the waterfall, while I stayed there to rest my back against a stone. I looked out onto the lake, my body filling with shuddering and otter feelings. I thought of Kevin and his long journey from solitude to community, from being alone to being with others, and the way he must have found space for both, his own learning and the hospitality he offered to anyone who wanted it. I wondered how he balanced his need for silence with public work, and how his time with the elements and nature with stone and wing changed as more people came here. I held out my hand to feel the tickle of the wind. A blackbird might never choose to nest and lay its eggs in my palm, but I know my hand will always be outstretched to nature and to people, because we're not separate from nature. We are nature. And without a community, when you're always on your own, it's much more difficult to share ideas and to grow. I'm so used to keeping my thoughts locked inside and being in a space where it's only me and my family. But now there are concentric circles rippling out for a digital online world into the very real world of activism, social action, and interaction. It keeps on rippling. I have to drift and swirl with it. But I'll always need to retreat back to the foundation stones of myself. The vernal equinox has come and gone, and I'm now on the cusp of my 15th birthday, midway between late childhood and adulthood. Everything and nothing has changed. Again, Seamus Heaney's words are with me. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked, neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life. At equinox a couple of years ago, we visited Caldra graveyard on Bow Island in Fermanagh, a nestled place, tucked behind the lake shore, hugged by a circle of trees. Bluebells were everywhere, and some had been picked and placed on one of the early Christian Janus figures in the dipped hollow of its stone head. These were almost 2,000-year-old figures, both look forwards, but in different directions, a duality. And that's what I felt on that day. I was 13, small in every way, but with big thoughts. I put my hands on the stones and felt a rumbling ancestral roar. It was the sort of sound your mother might make if she were scolding you to warn that your life was in danger. Urgent, pleading. I felt the heat of it as when I placed my hand on my cheek. On both Bow Island and Glendalough, with the traces of St. Kevin, I felt gateways opening, choices to make, roads to travel. I have a longing to spend more time with the intricacies of nature, without the interactions and the complications of people. I yearn for this simplicity, but I also want to go out into the world and weave my way, however overwhelming and painful it might be. Nature and us at odds and at one. As I ran along to join my family for the last stretch of the walk at Glendalough, leaving St. Kevin and the blackbird behind, a solar glare draped over us, connected us to the land with invisible strings. A longer, heavier line is about to be cast into the world. My heart is opening. I'm ready. That's probably one of my favorite little bits of the book because I got an excuse to put Seamus Heaney in there. So
It's one of my favorites too, actually. I'm glad that's the one you picked. And there's many favorite passages, but for anyone out there who hasn't read it, I think you can get a sense from this of how wonderfully these kind of observations of a particular moment are blended together with observations about larger questions about life, and Seamus Heaney, of course.
Yeah.
And I love that the kind of Janus-faced figure appearing, in the sense that, you know, people have been struggling with the duality of things for a long time.
I must admit, I had a little weep inside when I came up with that line. I was like, oh, yes. And it's like a funny thing now that I know that that's what authors do. I think I now I read a line in a book and I go, they had a little go whenever they wrote that line, which is quite nice. A funny thing about the book, that if people didn't realize this, is that I had no idea how this book was going to end when I was writing it, because it's a diary. I had absolutely no idea if it was going to be a happy ending, a sad ending. So when you're reading it, you're completely as in the dark as I am writing it, which is kind of funny.
I'm very moved by the insights into the connection between your experience of that moment and the larger ripples and rumblings of the larger world, as you put it, to paraphrase. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how throughout this book, those insights continue to connect, and how those rumblings begin to manifest over the course of the book.
So I think, the book, I always have this connection to nature. That's like one of the few constant things throughout the book, is the love of nature and the rumblings of nature. And the love of nature is the one thing that sort of has always been there for me since I was a young child. Sorry if I randomly get distracted. There's like birds at the feeder, like on my window. So if you see me randomly going like that, it's because bird. But anyway, I did, like, the fascination with the natural world was something that has always been there. It didn't really progress throughout the book. I think how I experienced nature changed, though, because I became a lot more contemplative throughout the book. There's a lot more forward. I feel like spring, I generally go associate with me being like, yeah, let's do everything. All fun. Summer, I associate with me being a little bit not well mentally, not very good, completely down. And then I consider, and then autumn, I don't know why I'm doing an autumn, honestly. It's sort of the in-between zone before winter, where I'm all contemplative and start talking a lot about mythology and stories and stuff, which is my favorite thing to talk about. So it was like, winter was the most comfortable one for me. And to this day, winter will always be my favorite season, because that was the most enjoyable one to write. And hopefully to read, but it was probably my favorite one was winter, because I learned how to I learned how to write as well, because this is the first book that I've like ever properly, like, I've done writing before, but I'd never written a book before. That's like the big thing, and so I think my writing gets better. And I become a lot more contemplative, a lot less angry. I was very angry in the beginning. Throughout, there was a lot of rage in me, because I was so angry at the system. I was angry at the bullies, and I was angry at a few of the teachers. I was angry at how we were treating the environment. I was angry about a lot of things. And I'm definitely a lot chiller of a person than I was in the book. Now, and I think it was one of the things that contributed to my like downturn mentally, was getting really, really, really angry about everything. Like, I still listen to punk like this. That's not going to change, but it was trying to work out solutions to problems like properly, and trying to think about stuff in a contemplative manner, and trying to, because the world became so fast paced. I think it was like bit ridiculous. I felt really trapped in all of these systems, and that did make me really, really angry. So the book was almost like this letting off of steam. It was the way of encapsulating all the stuff that was going. If anybody's read the book, it's like, this is not the stuff that you want to keep in your head. So I like keep it, because whenever thoughts in my head, and I don't get a chance to really process anything until I write it down. So if it's not being processed, it's like unprocessed sewage at that point, sloshing around in my head, doing all sorts of crazy damage. But then I sort of purify it. Whenever I write it, I process it. It comes out as nice drinking water at the end. And that analogy came out of absolutely nowhere. So it's sort of writing stuff was really, really important for me. And it was the thing that, because I process stuff twice, I don't really process things the first way around. I've got to like do it again. I've got to like reprocess, re-experience it, which for the painful memories is not so good, because you've got to re-experience the painful memories twice. But then at least you learn from them. You learn from your painful memories, because then you can learn how to make yourself a better person, which is good. So yeah, that sort of, it's the rumblings of nature have definitely always been there though.
Thank you.
I was just curious, listening to you talk about writing as, I actually really like your metaphor for writing. I'm going to remember this next time I'm stuck on a blank page and feel completely unable to produce sense. But I wondered when you started writing, and kind of what were how did you start kind of sitting down and putting words on a page and observing things? Because my sense is that, this is your first book, but it's not the first time you had kind of encountered the world that way.
So I've always written, well, like, I guess like whenever I learned to write, I wrote about everything that I could, because that was my way of I needed a way of expressing myself, enabling me to process the world properly. And I tried all different mediums. I tried art, you don't want to see it. I tried music, you don't want to hear it. Although I am trying to relearn the guitar with varying degrees of success, because my family's quite into music, so I feel like I've got to learn some instruments at some point. But writing was the one that came most naturally to me, and so I stuck with it. So it was this thing that I always had a diary. I think the original diary is like wait a second. I've just realized, because we've just moved house again, everything's a little bit mumble jumbled. But I've just realized, completely randomly, this is like top secret information. But basically, oh Jesus, I didn't realize I had this many. These are the original. This is actually Diary of a Young Naturalist. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So this is. So I think there's another one up there, but this is basically Diary of a Young Naturalist in the raw form.
Amazing.
And my handwriting is absolutely horrific. Oh my God, I'm like leaking information. Anyway, someone's gonna pause that. Oh well. It's horrific. But because like I hadn't because when I write, I like splurge out a stream of consciousness and then sort of focus it down into something, because I find it hard to go. I think it's impossible to go write out a perfect paragraph instantaneously. You just got to put everything out onto the page, because you need your materials to work with as a writer. And if anybody wants to write, and if anybody wants to get into writing, this is why I advise put all of your thoughts down to a page, because then you're like a sculptor. You got to sculpt your writing. So you get all of your raw materials out onto the page. Then you take out what you don't need, which is generally most of it. As like I could write pages and pages, and it turns out being a paragraph. And then you sort of add in cool lines and stuff like that, and that's sort of how you write. Well, it's how I write. People might have different ways of doing it, but that's sort of how I write. Is and it's the way I've always written. So there's loads of random notebooks around the house that if I get an idea, I'll just write it down and then collect up all the notebooks, and like maybe in like randomly at some point, if I get round to it, then work on it that way. God, I'm so disorganized. It's ridiculous. Like people always say, oh, autistic people are really, really organized. They like things really, really neatly. And I do. But my mental organization, like my desk, which is what I'm looking at, it's completely a bombshell zone. But well. Oh.
Absolutely. Can relate. So I'd like to kind of open up the conversation a bit. We have a bit more time to both of you to discuss some of the larger issues related to Diary of a Young Naturalist. We talked a little bit about some of the life lessons that have emerged for you, Dara, during the process of writing this book. But we haven't touched that much on sort of what we see as humanity's role in the larger ecosystem. And I know that you've done some activist work as well and been awarded for it, in fact. So I'd like to hear some thoughts on where we are as a species and our impact on the global ecosystem at any given scale.
Well, humans are a strange species. First of all, we've broken the usual extinction. Like most animals have instincts that they sort of follow. There's sort of set paths that an animal will follow during its life. Humans have completely changed that. And first of all, we have we have such a diversity of life. Not enormous like compared to other animals and as other species. We do have an enormous like physical diversity, but we have an incredible mental diversity. I found it's incredible. Like we all generally look the same. Like if you look at a dog, there's some dogs are massive and really like my dog's a greyhound, as skinny as can be and really, really big. And you also have dwarf terriers. And then you go to humans and it's not real. There's not a lot of difference on the grand scheme of things. But our minds, on the other hand, some of us are introverted, some of us are extroverted, some of us really, really like some of us like food, other of us like art. Art, like the fact that art even exists is like it's unessential. It's non-essential stuff for basic living. We are naturally attracted to beautiful things. Like music is based off maths, we like nice ratios. So like 2:1 and stuff, 2:1 and stuff. We like all of that. And we have this fascination with order in our world. And so as a species, we're incredible in that sense. And our role in the ecosystem should be to almost be custodians of the natural world, because the life never has really has had this sort of complexity before. Like you look at the human brain and it's so complex, and it'd be a real shame if we messed up this world and ended up going extinct, because like on the whole, we should be trying to make sure that everything doesn't go wrong. In general, we should be sort of trying to I think as a species we should be trying to make sure that the climate doesn't get messed up. We shouldn't be actively causing extinction level events. That's not generally a good idea. Like we've caused animals to go extinct as another animal. Like that's never happened in the history of Earth, is that a single animal has caused the extinction of multiple other species. That's never really happened. Like, it's usually environment. We've become an environmental factor. Like, that's pretty insane to think about, that humans have become an environmental factor, and we've been around for like a fraction of the lifetime of the Earth. So that's pretty mind-boggling to think about. So I think we should try not to cause extinction level events. We should be trying to be custodians of the Earth. We should try to take good care of this beautiful, beautiful world. Let the natural, so we should let the natural course of events take place, but we shouldn't be trying to, I don't fit, we should be trying to protect our natural world first and foremost. We should be those custodians. We should be not trying to almost exploit everything that we possibly can see, because that's not sustainable or in any way, shape, or form. It's not a way that we can successfully exist as a species. And it's not a way that any species can exist. And including the non-human species as well. They can't deal with us being so massive as a single species. And it's like talking about our role as on this grand concept. It puts everything sort of into perspective. As a species, we've only been around like a few hundred, like Homo sapiens has only been around, I think, like 100 or so thousand years, 100 to 200,000 years. And the Earth has been around for 4 billion. Dinosaurs were around for like over 60 million years, 66 million years, I think. Something around that. I could be off by a good few million, but oh well. They've been around for millions and millions of years. We've been around for a few, like we should be trying to sort of keep ourselves on track, because I do believe that humans can do incredible things. We can, as a species, as long as we make sure that we stay connected to our world, stay connected to the natural environment that we live in, try not to cause extinction level events, and be generally good and kind to all living creatures. And I feel like those are sort of the basest things that we as a species need to do on the grandest scale possible. And that's sort of our role. But because it's hard to speak about a role on anything but the grandest of scales, because we're so diverse, as my original point. We're such a diverse species that it's hard to really talk about individual roles of humans, because like we all end up doing different things in the world. Some of us become scientists, other of us become artists. I'm trying to do both, but oh well. Some of us want to make music. Other of us want to play sports. All of us want to do different things and take up our roles in the world. So talking about what the individual can do, what our individual role should be, is different. But we can talk as a species. We should be trying to take good care of our world. I try to talk about it pretty broad there.
Bathsheba, do you have insights to respond to that with, or thoughts as well?
I was really struck as Dara was talking, because I'm in my, put on my history professor hat role this summer, teaching a course on global environmental history for the last 500 years. So it moves all over time and place. And one of the most striking things, and it kind of jumps out at me every time I teach this class, is how recent and how kind of in the broad course of human history, how bizarre the current way that we live is, right? It's really, it's not even a couple hundred years old. It's honestly, really happens after the Second World War. It's this tiny little moment. And on the one hand,
that's living in castles 500 years
right
ago.
Yes, exactly. Right. If you're in Northern Ireland, you can actually see, very clearly the ways that people were living not all that long ago in the broad scheme of things. on the one hand, I can find that very depressing because the scale of environmental transformation and destruction seems really kind of outsized for it happening in one human lifetime, really. But on the other hand, it also means that we're not stuck with this.
Yeah, we can make that, we can reverse that change incredibly quickly as well. If we can cause that much destruction in that much time, how much creation can we do in that time? How much can we make? And how much can we be constructive with in that? So it's almost, it's sort of like depressingly hopeful.
Yes. Optimism or something.
Yeah, depending on which way you look. Like, it's depressing that we've managed to do that much destruction at that time, but also gives me hope that we can make a difference. Like, we've made such a dent in the world in such a short space of time that we can probably fix the problems that we've done in this short space of time as well. Like, when people always go, oh, we can't really do that, like it'll take too long, and I'm going, well, on average, like when we're under normal circumstances, it takes like a decade to get a vaccine out properly. Usually we managed to do that in 9 months. Yeah. Like when we actually get our heads down, and the scientists actually get their heads down, they can really, really go for it. Like, you get a bunch of smart people in a room, they generally create a solution pretty quickly. And if we could devote the resources that all of these challenges that our world faces, if we could actually like go, this is a crisis, we could probably solve most of the problems pretty quickly, surprisingly quickly. I do find we're an incredible species. Like, we're like so I do think that's what gives me the most hope. I have to say.
Thank you. So we're coming up on our time here. So I'd like to give you each the opportunity for a bit of a closing statement about sort of what your takeaways have been from this book and from this conversation, any special messages for our viewers, and where our viewers can find any more work of yours down the line.
Well, I feel my task here is very simple, which is read Dara's book. Order it from Lost City if you have the chance, or stop by if you're in DC. But it's a wonderful read. I think it's a wonderful summer read, actually. Just as a, if you can take it out in the garden, that's a good place to read it. And I think, as somebody who works with young folks who are just a couple years older than Dara regularly, that the perspective of a generation that's really coming into this environmental crisis as it's kind of fully formed, rather than sort of watching it develop in early adulthood the way that I did, is a perspective that we all just should keep in mind. And it's very acutely written on that level, and is also, I think, a really wonderful and unsparing portrait of the ways in which it can be really hard to be a young person, a young autistic person, a young person just dealing with social life in general. So I think it's really worth spending a couple of days or weeks with, depending on how fast you read. And I was delighted.
So my sort of takeaways from this talk, first of all, it's been amazing. This is actually the first time that I've been able to talk about like grand topics before in the interview. So I'm quite like inwardly going, yes, I got to do it. So that's been a great takeaway from this talk. It's gonna give me a good old warm feeling inside. Be able to talk about these things that I do care so passionately about. I guess I've got to technically say, can you go buy the book? I hate saying that. But anyway, it's been absolutely amazing to do all of this, because I do love speaking about all these, all of the things that I do care really, really passionately about, and be able to talk about them in this sort of way. So yeah, it's been really, really enjoyable, and I would advise everybody to get out into nature, no matter where you are. I think you'll find great enjoyment in picking out all those little details, and I hope that everybody goes out and enjoys the natural world. So yeah, God, I'm really bad at closing statements.
Oh,
Well.
thank you so much. Thank you both very much for your thoughts and for these really amazing insights into the book and also into human connection to the natural world. I think a lot of us are taking something away that we can really think about. I'm going to leave work today and go spend some time in the BC Rock Creek Park. So that's my homework for myself today. For our viewers, if you would like to read Diary of a Young Naturalist, it is still available at Lost City Books, and we have more on the way. It's an incredible read, definitely really worthwhile, and you can keep up with our other author events by signing up for our newsletter or keep subscribing to our YouTube so you can see more and more live streams with authors. Until next time, I will bid you both good afternoon / good evening, and I hope you have a great day.